Each candidate will be given 1 minute for opening comments and 90 seconds for close. We flipped a coin a few minutes ago to see who would go first, and Congressman Labrador, you have that honor.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Idaho Public Television, and thank you, League of Women Voters, for having this opportunity to have an important debate tonight. Thank you to the panel for being here tonight, and I look forward to the discussion that we're going to have. It's been a tremendous honor for me to serve you in Washington, D.C. 4 years ago, I asked for your vote, and I asked you to send me to Washington, D.C. so we could change the way things were being done in Washington. I asked you to send me because I thought we were spending too much money. I thought that Washington was a mess. I thought that the decisions that were being made were not being made with Idaho values. And you gave me the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and to change the way things were done in Washington. And I'm here to tell you that I have done exactly that. In the last 4 years, we have spent less money. We have actually brought the unemployment rate down, and we have done the things that we needed to do to make sure that Washington, D.C. becomes a place where we can work. There's much more to be done, and that's why I want to go back to Washington to continue to do the work that you sent me to do. So tonight, I think you're going to be seeing a big contrast between the two candidates, and you're going to be able to send me once again to Washington. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Representative Ringo, your opening remarks, please.
Thank you to Idaho Debates and to the panel, to my opponent, and those in attendance tonight. America has been the country that aspires to offer opportunity to all, where the American dream is a real possibility. But we're not that country anymore. The nation's wealth is concentrated in the hands of an elite few, while too many families struggle to put food on the table for their children. Special interest money buys elections and lobbyists to maintain and protect policies for the rich. This is wrong. We need leaders who care about the people they serve more than their own advancement. So now, we need to work on policies to restore the American ideal. We need to invest in people and help them prosper. We need to invest in programs such as Head Start and Pell Grants, to invest in veterans, to invest in safe roads and bridges and immigration reform. Congressman Labrador is not willing to make those investments. I am Shirley Ringo, and that is why I'm running.
Thank you so much. The first question is from Rebecca Boone for Congressman Labrador.
Congressman Labrador, during your time in Congress, you've been absent from voting at nearly twice the average of the other representatives currently serving. In fact, according to GovTrack, between 2011 and last month, you missed 121 of more than 2,700 roll call votes. That's about a 4.4% absentee rate. You don't hold any leadership positions, and nothing you've sponsored has become law. Many of the bills you introduced during your last term were repeats of bills that you tried and failed to get passed during your first term. If voters send you to Congress for a third term, what will you accomplish?
Quite a bit. You know, like I said in my introductory statement, the debt is less today because I'm in Washington, D.C. We actually have a higher unemployment, a lower unemployment rate because I'm in Washington, D.C. I do have a family. I'm the youngest member of the delegation by quite a bit, by a long stretch. And I do have to stay home sometimes for some of the things that my family has to do. I've missed about 4% of my votes. I go to Washington, D.C. Some of the votes that I have missed also have something to do with the travel schedule. Sometimes you miss votes because you're traveling on a Monday night and your layover is actually delayed. But the most important thing is that I've done everything that I told the people of Idaho that I was going to do, that I was going to change the tone of what was going to happen there in Washington. You also need to look at some of the things that we have done. Just 2 months ago, we had a big debate about immigration in Congress, about what was happening at the border. It was because of me and because of my leadership that we actually passed something out of the House of Representatives. The reality is that Harry Reid is not taking up any of the things that are passing out of the House. It's very difficult for Republicans to get anything passed out of the House of out of the Congress because Harry Reid is not taking up many of those things. So I'm very proud of my record, and I will continue to fight for the people of Idaho.
Did you have a follow-up, Rebecca?
Yes. In 2012, when you were absent for about 4.7% of the votes that year, you told the Idaho Statesman that you thought you could get that number down, saying, quote, "The people of Idaho hired me to do a job and I should be there."
And I did. And I got it down.
Sorry.
Yes.
Last year you were absent for 5% of the votes. Do you still think you need to be present for more votes, or as you said, have you found a balance between family life and work life and managing to get things
I
passed
actually
when you're not constantly there?
I did miss as many votes this year, but I do have a family. I have 5 children. I have 3 that are still at home. Sometimes they have programs, they have graduations, they have things that I do attend. And for me, my most important thing is my family. So I have missed some votes because of my family activities and my responsibilities as a home. As a father, if the people of Idaho don't want to send a father to Washington, D.C. who has young children, they have that opportunity. But I can bet you that except for you in the media, I have had very few people actually get upset with me because of that. So I don't think that it's as important an issue as you continue to assert.
Your next question's for Representative Ringo.
Representative Ringo, you're a Democrat in a very Republican state. As the senior Democrat on the state's Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, you most often ended up in the news as a lonesome no vote on appropriations that nearly always ultimately passed. For instance, you voted against a 1% raise for Idaho teachers because you said it didn't go far enough. And you voted against sending $1 million to Idaho's Constitutional Defense Fund because you worried the money would be used to defend Idaho's ban on gay marriage. You'll likely still be in the minority if you're sent to Washington, D.C. Why should we expect you to have better success than you've had in Boise?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that possibly depends on how you define success. As you note, I was a Democrat in the Idaho legislature, and we all know that that means being outnumbered by about 4 to 1. And so in my role on the Joint Finance Committee, I had to be sometimes a lonely voice standing up for what I thought was right. And you mentioned 2 of those things. When I go to Washington, D.C., I may still be in the minority, but not quite to the extent that I was in the Idaho legislature. I'll definitely have more allies to work with than I did there. But I think that this experience that I had in the Idaho legislature was very valuable to me because I had no choice other than to work across the aisle to try to get things done. And I did manage to have some accomplishments that I think were very important. And when I go to Washington, D.C., rather than work to shut down government, I'll work to try to cooperate with the people there to get things done.
The next question is from Jessica for Representative Ringo.
How do you compromise? That is, when do you decide when you want to give up some things for the greater good and when an issue is too important to you to give up anything?
Thank you. I believe that most of us have thought about the important issues and we know just where we stand. We've developed certain values growing up that are hard to deviate from time to time. But as people that are representing individuals that have elected us, we have to step back and think not only how do I feel about that issue, but what will be the best for the people that I serve. And that's where sometimes we may give up something on what our strong individual values are and work to serve the people.
I have a follow-up for you, Representative. Can you think of a time in the Idaho legislature where you might have had to compromise your own beliefs to get something done for the people of Idaho?
Well, I could think of many of them, but probably on the Joint Finance Committee would be some of the cases where I did have to compromise because, as many of you might know, the Idaho Constitution requires a balanced budget. And so as a member of the Joint Finance Committee, it was necessary to set priorities and perhaps not be able to give support in one area, even though I considered it very important, in order to give support to something that I thought might have been more pressing than that.
The next question is for Congressman Labrador.
I'd like to ask Congressman Labrador the same question, and that is, when do you compromise?
It's a great question. I think you never compromise your principles, but there's a lot of things that you can do in Washington, D.C. and as a legislator to actually come to a middle or to bring people from the other party that can be your allies on an issue. 2 important issues for me are actually prison reform. Prison reform is not something that we usually have Republicans leading on. And we actually have the opportunity to work with people in the Democratic Party, and I've co-sponsored legislation dealing with prison reform. And I think that's one way to actually learn to work with the other side. I've also worked on other legislation like immigration and others where I've actually been able to work with Republicans and Democrats, and you don't always get what you want, but you can actually get a consensus of the things that are necessary for us to improve America. But I think when you're talking about a question of principles, I think you should never compromise your principles. And that's actually one of the things I like about Shirley. She's a left-wing ideologue, just like I'm a conservative, and she actually will stand on her principles. They're different than the people of Idaho, but I think even if you look at her literature and you look at all the different things that she has been saying during this campaign season, she has not compromised her principles, and I actually admire that about her.
And you had a follow-up for the congressman, right?
Mm-hmm. Both the state and the national GOP have been in turmoil lately, and earlier this year you launched a long shot bid to become House Majority Leader, and you lost that bid to California Representative Kevin McCarthy. You were also brought into the state Idaho GOP convention to oversee that, with supporters hoping you would bring some unity to Idaho's various factions in the Republican Party, but you conceded defeat there as well when things broke apart and there was political infighting, and it ended without any new chairman and without any new platform votes. So in short, you have developed a bit of a reputation as a contrarian. Does this hurt your ability to get things done in Congress?
Not at all. Actually, let's separate those two events because they're totally different events. First, let's talk about the race for Majority Leader. I knew that I was going to lose that race for Majority Leader. I did it because I thought it was necessary for the voice that I represent, which is the more conservative faction of the Republican Party, to be represented in that race, and also to actually bring our leadership some awareness of some of the problems that we were having as Republicans nationally and at in the congressional factions. And if you look at what happened, I obviously lost that race for Majority Leader, but just 2 weeks later there was this issue on immigration where our party was completely divided on what was happening on immigration. I was the one who was able to bring all the factions of the Republican Party together to actually have success and to bring a bill to the floor that passed. In fact, the night before I was able to do that, the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader told the conference that we were going to go home and we were not going to have a bill that was going to pass the House of Representatives. It was because of my leadership that I was able to bring all the factions together. And many people said that it was because of the race that I had just entered into, because I had acted with class and dignity during that race, and they had seen me in a new light, that they were able to follow me on that. So actually I think the race for Majority Leader was good for me, and you can ask anybody in Washington, D.C. whether it actually helped me. It helped me tremendously.
All right, we have to move on. The next question is for...
I wonder if I could
please respond.
comment.
Yes.
I do have to take just a minute here, because embedded in that nice compliment that the congressman gave me was branding me as a left-wing ideologue, which I have to take some exception to. The reputation I have politically comes from my performance in the legislature, which involves such things as supporting schools, supporting people with disabilities, working for equal pay for women, and working for adequate pay for public employees, and so on. And I don't think that quite measures up to what we call a left-wing ideologue. And if I could continue a bit here, on the immigration reform thing, I want to be careful that our election time posture doesn't differ from our posture during the congressional session. And the Senate did pass a bipartisan bill on immigration reform, which came to the House, and I would have thought it would have given you something to work with that you could move forward on. And instead you made such comments as, if the Speaker brings this bill to the floor, it should cost him his speakership, and this is a good cause for Republicans, but not this year. So I think the leadership maybe was missing at the time that it was critical. And you are talking about leadership that you provided at the end of the session, and who knows where that will go.
Well, if I could respond.
Please do.
The reality is that I did use the model of the Senate bill to try to craft some legislation that we could pass in the House of Representatives, but there was a single problem. Single problem was the leadership of your party. We had President Obama and we had Harry Reid, who continuously called the House Democrats and told them, do not agree to anything more conservative than we passed in the Senate. So it was impossible. Every time we actually were getting close to a compromise in the House of Representatives, it was the leadership of your party that decided that they didn't want any compromise, that to them it was either the Senate bill or nothing. And that happened for 6 months. I was almost every single day in meetings for 6 months, and we could not get actually the Democrats in the House who wanted to reach a compromise. We could not get them to agree to anything because their leadership was telling them not to agree to any of the compromises that we wanted in the House. So we tried and we worked on it quite extensively.
Well, there you go, playing the blame game again, trying to blame the Democrats. But
it's
in
just
fact,
a fact.
The votes were there to pass that bill, and it could have gone to conference committee after that to get a compromise.
We actually have a question for you.
And now our constituents would have something done.
We happen to have a question on immigration just for you from Kelsey Mosley.
Your opponent is an immigration lawyer who specializes in this issue, which is one of the volatile issues facing this nation. What do you have to offer on this that he doesn't?
Well, I certainly would have to say I don't have the expertise that he has. I would probably indicate some disappointment that this expertise wasn't used to move the issue forward better in the 4 years that the congressman had to work on that. However, I have spent quite a bit of time talking to people throughout the 1st District, and that includes the people in the Latino community who have indicated to me not only their disappointment in what the congressman has done, but I try to get as many ideas as I can from them about what would be helpful about the type of law we need to move forward.
And the next question is for Congressman Labrador from Kelsey.
You've been in the thick of immigration reform talks and nothing has happened. You were against the DREAM Act, which Democrats say is key to a compromise. Many of the issues relating to immigrant workers have been the same for decades. So can you realistically say you were able to make progress on immigration reform or immigration issues if elected to another term?
Absolutely. In fact, there were 2 bills that passed the House of Representatives because of the leadership that I provided in the House of Representatives. We had one bill that actually, this is a complicated issue, but the law actually says that every country has the same number of visas that are available to them when you're trying to bring somebody, whether you're a spouse or something like that. We actually passed out of the House of Representatives a bill that would have shifted some of those visas to countries that have a high traffic of immigrants to the United States, like India, China, and Mexico. That actually passed the House of Representatives because of the leadership that I provided. And the Senate decided not to take it up because they wanted a comprehensive bill. They didn't want a step-by-step approach. I also led in the effort to actually have reform of the high-tech visa programs. And that, again, went to the Senate, and the Senate chose not to pick it up because they wanted the comprehensive bill. I think the best approach for immigration reform is doing a step-by-step approach. Immigration is one of the most complicated areas of law. I have led on this issue. I've actually had legislation. I have helped legislation go through the House of Representatives, but it's the Senate that refuses to take up any of those pieces of legislation because they want only one solution, and it's not the solution that we want in the House of Representatives.
Would you like to respond to that?
Please
do.
Just briefly. Yes, it is true that the Senate wants comprehensive immigration reform, and as a matter of fact, that's what the Latino community that the congressman represents seems to indicate that they want as well. I actually represent the 1st Congressional District of Idaho. Well, but they are in your district, and you should be responding to the way they would want to have it done. My concern about the piecemeal approach is that if, for example, somebody just is interested in border security and get that piece of the package passed, I'm not confident that once satisfied that such an individual would be willing to look at a broader package. So I think it's much better to do a comprehensive approach, and the Senate did have one that had bipartisan support, and it was certainly a place from which we could have sprung forward.
That's the problem, is that for 20 years we have been trying to do a comprehensive approach and nothing has passed. We actually got things passed out of the House of Representatives that would have provided a piecemeal approach, a step-by-step approach that would eventually lead to a comprehensive solution of the immigration problem. I'll give you one specific thing that would have helped the Latino community immensely. There's a law that bars people who want to do it the legal way. If they want to come back to the United States, there's a law that says that if you want to leave the United States and come back, you have to remain in your home country for 10 years. I proposed actually getting rid of that bar. Most Democrats agree with me. I wanted that to be a standalone bill or something attached to one of these smaller bills, and I couldn't get the leadership of the House and the Senate Democrats to agree to this thing that would have actually helped 25% of the people that are here illegally. That's the problem. If we have an irrational decision by the Democratic Party that for them it's either the Senate bill or nothing, and we could actually fix this problem in a step-by-step approach.
Did you want to respond to that?
Well, the item that the congressman mentioned certainly would have been helpful to many people in the community. However, there are many there that are just crying out to have something going in the way of a path to citizenship, and that needs to be part of comprehensive immigration reform, and that was part of the Senate bill. It would have helped many people as well.
All right, the next question is from Rebecca Boone for Representative Ringo.
In 2006, the voters of Idaho decided to define marriage as between one man and one woman. Presumably that represented the will of the people of Idaho. At what point do you concede to the will of people, even if you don't agree with them?
Well, that certainly is a good question. That was a decision that somewhat surprised me, given the libertarian tendencies of many people in Idaho, and that they would think that legislators and others should really cross the line over into somebody's bedroom and tell that person what to do. The question now that's up for discussion is whether or not that's constitutional. And that's definitely a point where a decision needs to be made, and it appears that we're definitely moving in the direction of tying down the fact that that was not a constitutional decision. And we certainly can't put ourselves in a situation where the vote of the people overrides the Constitution.
You had a follow-up.
How do you balance the rights of states to set their own path with the civil rights of the citizens in that state? Should the government even be involved in marriage at all?
Well, I don't think the government should have been involved in that particular situation, and we can even look at the ways that some people were affected by that decision. As a matter of fact, looking at Madeline Taylor, a veteran who had lived with her partner for 25 years, and the Idaho Constitution at that time was preventing her from making arrangements to being buried by her partner because of the decision that the state had made. I just think that what we have to look at in this case is that the power of the state does not override the United States Constitution, and that's the decision that's being made and appropriately should be made.
Rebecca, you had the next question was for Congressman Labrador.
Yes. Congressman, you issued a statement this week that said unelected judges shouldn't be undoing the will of the people by overturning the state's ban on gay marriage. But courts have stepped in on local issues before to protect the rights of minority populations. How do you balance that view with the separation of powers that are inherent in the way our country is structured?
We have to look first at the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution about gay marriage. There's nothing in the Constitution about traditional marriage. So you need to decide whether that's something that courts should be deciding or the people should be deciding. The people of Idaho decided by 62%, an overwhelming majority, that they wanted to have something in their state constitution, and that traditional marriage should be protected. That may change. You know, if we put it to a ballot again, maybe the people of Idaho will disagree with that decision, but I don't think it should be unelected judges who should be making those decisions.
You also said that states should be able to define marriage for themselves, but not all marriages are state-centric. Like federal tax filings are directly affected by marital status. So how is a marriage in Oregon different than a marriage in Idaho, and why should they be treated differently?
Because the people should decide. Now, you did ask a really important question to Shirley, and that's whether the state should even be involved again at all. And that's something that we should actually start considering as policymakers, is whether we should have all these benefits based on marriage status. Maybe the state should back off a little bit and decide that it's that there shouldn't be any, that it shouldn't be involved at all in marriage.
How far would you extend that stance?
Well, I think it's something we need to start discussing.
Did you want to respond?
If I could just weigh in briefly, we can see how awkward it would be to have a state-by-state decision on this, where a couple could get married in Idaho and then go to Oregon and have them not recognize that marriage. So that's something that just wouldn't work from a practical point of view. But I think it's also been true over the history of this country that we have not accepted discrimination against minority groups, and that applies here.
Congressman, I have a question for you. The situation that Representative Ringo brought up with the veteran who was unable to be buried with her partner, at what point do you address the actual pain that is involved in these decisions, the actual human effect of these policy decisions?
Well, maybe you should look at that situation and decide, why should the state decide who should be buried in that plot? Those are things that, you know, why can't she be buried with a sibling or somebody that she decides? You can look at some of those issues. You also have contracts where you can actually decide, for example, in the situation of being in the hospital, you can decide through a contract who can be present in the hospital, who can do all those things. There are civil remedies and civil ways that we can actually resolve this issue without having to change the years and years and years of tradition on what the marriage should be defined as.
Did you want to respond to that, Representative Ringo?
Well, my response would just be that those civil remedies still result in treating different groups differently, and that shouldn't be the arrangement that we have.
Okay, we have to move on. The next question is from Jessica for Representative Ringo.
Yeah, I'd like to move on to the debt. And Representative Ringo, are Social Security and Medicare things that you are willing to address to reduce deficit spending?
It would be my strong opinion and practice that we should protect those programs however we can. And I would, for example, not consider weakening the ability for any senior citizen to be able to get health coverage through Medicare. I wouldn't. Are you? You want me to continue here? I can't tell if you had another question, but for example, the congressman had a proposal, something like a voucher program that would allow senior citizens to be able to apply money from the government to go purchase his or her own insurance, and that would introduce differences in coverage, I believe, that are not acceptable. So I do think we need to keep Medicare intact for our senior citizens, and we definitely need to keep Social Security intact. I'll stop there in case you have a further question.
Your next question?
Yeah, Representative Ringo, how big a deal is the debt, and where would you cut?
Well, the debt is a huge deal, and it does threaten the future of this country, so we have to give it a great deal of attention, and I've thought about it quite a bit. My difference with the congressman here, and we've noticed a few as we've gone along, is that his approach is just slash across the board, indiscriminately, regardless of who would be hurt by those cuts. I think that the only responsible way to address this debt, as it must be addressed, is to combine certain cuts that would be carefully chosen with other measures such as tax reform. And if we work on full employment with individuals getting a livable wage, I think we can find that that also takes the pressure off of programs that are supported by taxes and provides more energy for business because people will have discretionary money to spend. So I think it's a combination of efforts on several fronts that's going to successfully address this problem without putting too much of the burden on any one part of the population.
Very briefly before we move on, what are some things that you would be willing to cut, Representative?
I think that, for example, defense would be one area that I would be willing to cut. We know that when we got into the war with Iraq, that was justified on a very thin premise that turned out to be wrong, that it ended up costing us a great deal of money. We had to borrow money to fund that war, and as we spin out the costs that we paid along with interest in the future, there are estimates that it cost us between $2.4 million and $3 million. And as we withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan, and I hope are careful about things that we engage in the future, that we'll be able to control that budget, for one example.
All right, the next question is for Congressman Labrador from Jessica.
Yeah, Congressman Labrador, I know this is an issue that you're interested in, and as Representative Ringo said, you have said and you say on your website that you support significant across-the-board cuts to federal spending. And so I'm curious how far that extends to. Does it extend to military cuts?
Right now in this 5-minute segment, you saw the biggest difference between the two candidates. She wasn't willing to mention a single thing that she would cut except for the military. So the one thing that the Constitution provides for the federal government to do for the American people, she wants to cut that, but she's not willing to touch anything else. Then she talked about tax reform, which in her lingo actually means tax increases. She's not talking about tax reform. She wants to increase taxes so we can actually do nothing to change the drivers of our debt and actually increase taxes so we can have a less productive society. I absolutely am willing to touch everything across the board. In fact, I have voted against increases in spending for the military. I have voted against increases in spending in just about every area. Even I've been criticized for voting against increases in spending for some programs that are here, that are based here in Idaho. I think it's important for us to look at all of the programs, put everything on the table, and be serious about what we're facing. In the next 20 to 30 years, we are going to have enough revenue just to pay for Social Security, Medicare, and the debt. That's all we're going to have money for. And if we don't do anything to change the drivers of our debt, we're going to have a nation that is bankrupt. What has actually ruined nations in the past has not been military conquest, has been their inability to actually pay for the government. And I think it's really important, like Mike Mullins said, the debt is the #1 issue, the #1 national security threat that we face as a nation, and we need to make sure that we do something about that debt and that deficit.
Would you like to respond? Please
yes.
do.
I think it was very nice of the congressman to explain my tax reform plan, but I would like to go a little further, and yes, I would probably be willing to look at increases in what is paid by the 1%. But I think most of it can be done by closing loopholes and doing away with corporate welfare. It's a very complex situation with a number of facets, but it's not true that when I say tax reform, I mean increase your taxes.
Right. I went to your website, so let's make sure I didn't misunderstand. I believe that we should close the loopholes, just like you do, but we should use it to actually lower taxes. In your website and other statements that you have made, you believe that we should close the loopholes so we could increase spending. I think that's a major difference between us. In fact, you have over the last 6 years 3 times proposed in the Idaho legislature that we increase taxes so we can pay for spending. So I just want to make sure that I'm not misunderstanding, but what I have seen about your record is that you want to increase taxes to pay for spending. I actually want to close the loopholes just like you do, but I want to do it so we can actually have a fair and flat tax for all Americans.
Is it okay if I answer his question?
Please
That's
do.
not the usual routine, but I'm happy to do that if that's all right. Sure. The congressman, let me just give an example that I think it addresses this particular issue. One of the things that the congressman did is hold up approval of the Farm Bill because cuts in food stamps weren't sufficiently deep. Now, in Idaho, we have 230,000 of our individuals that are on food stamps. Clearly, this is something in Idaho, which is a low-income state, that we need this kind of support. 22% of Idaho children are defined as food insecure. So, if we were able to get more revenue by closing loopholes, and if we could use some of that revenue to give the needy people the support they need, then I would certainly do that rather than lower taxes. It's going to take a study of what the needs are and what revenue we have to reduce them, and we're not going to, in my service in Congress, we're certainly not going to balance the budget on the backs of the needy.
All right, we have to move on.